Happy Devils Wednesday. This is the State of the Fan Address, episode 57, titled Return to Play-by-Play, ? I am your host, Sam Wu, here with Nick Villano, Pucks and Pitchforks blog editor-in-chief. Oh, boy, do we have a podcast for you tonight. We got play-by-play guys from the AHL, Rob Lippolis, and from the Devils NHL, Steve Cangialosi will be here very shortly. So let's get right to it. Live via Skype, we have from Binghamton, Rob Lippolis. Rob, you are on with Sam and Nick. How are you tonight?
Guys, I'm doing good. It's good to talk to you, and I want to personally thank you. The picture you tweeted out earlier today, you picked a younger, skinnier, better-looking Rob, so thank you.
Oh, that's funny.
We are
that's
here.
We are
here to promote the best of our guests, the very best, whether that's, diet by Facebook or whether that's, we are here to present the best possible Rob. So, but Rob, how you doing? How you doing throughout this whole weird situation without hockey?
Oh man, it's crazy. It seems like it. At the same time, it seems like it was just yesterday, but it also seems like it was a year ago. I mean, it's kind of dragged on. First week or so, I was like, you know what, this working from home, it's pretty cool. I could do this a little bit more. And then week 2, started pulling my hair out. Week 3, it was just a downward spiral from there. But doing some fishing, some golfing. They closed the courses down here for a while, started opening back up, and now here in New York, they're actually opening up phase 1, and the Devils in Binghamton were a part of phase 1. So we're doing offsetting days in the office. They set it up so you're not near anyone by, your desk or cubicle. Got to get your temperature tested when you come into work. Got to wear the mask and everything. So it's different, but it's kind of good to get out of the house again.
Yeah, and that's interesting to know that they opened Binghamton because, obviously one of the main reasons why we want to have you on tonight is last week there was so much that happened. We didn't get to talk a lot about the AHL season getting canceled, and I wanted to have you on. Obviously, we want to talk about Binghamton specifically, but first I do want to ask, how surprised were you when they made the decision? Did you think that there was a possibility that they can bring the NHL and AHL back, maybe in a similar format where it's just a playoff squad, or were you kind of waiting just for this announcement?
It was kind of just, let's just make the announcement type feeling. In the American Hockey League, in any minor league sport, your income is so much driven on tickets and concessions, right? So if you don't have people in your building, that's a huge hit. And the longer it kind of went on, after a couple weeks, because we weren't really sure what was happening. I mean, the dominoes just started to fall, right? And we were in Rochester, I think it was March 11th. It was a Wednesday. It was a win. And then we had to get on the bus and go right from Rochester to Laval, which is 30 minutes outside of Montreal. And right before the game, we're kind of all, on Twitter. And that's when I think it was Columbus and San Jose said they had to play games without fans. I think those were the two teams, first to do it, come out and say it. I mean, and then all the college, the tournaments started getting canceled. And this was all during the game. So we get on the bus, we're like, man, what's going on? And so we get to Laval, probably about 4 a.m. Normally we drop the guys off, and then the staff, myself and everything would go over, take the equipment to the rink, kind of set up the locker room, everything, let it dry out from after the game. But we were getting word, hey, Laval wasn't going to practice the next day, and they were kind of just closing the arena. So we're like, okay, what now? So we were sitting in the lobby just waiting, and everything else is starting to, just drop. The leagues were canceling, the USHL shut down. And once they announced that we had to, head back home, it was so kind of chaotic and so much uncertainty. We were like, we got to floor it to the border. We got to get back over the border. We don't know what's going to happen. So it was a pretty wild 24 hours there. We were on the bus for 13 hours of a 24-hour span, just nice quick trip to Montreal and back. So, but, when once 4 or 5 weeks went by, it was I think the, general consensus was, okay, it'd be much easier for these teams to kind of move into off-season mode, right? Get back, some season tickets, corporate sales for dashers, ice logos, etc. And until then, we really couldn't do that. So it was kind of, you could see the writing on the wall in my mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's actually funny. Like, Sam could help with the story, but we were live on the air when Rudy Gobert tested positive and they canceled the Jazz game. And, we were just sitting there talking about live, and then Tom Hanks came out right after that. And then the NBA canceled the season, and it was all within a very, very, very short time. We were literally on our 1 hour podcast and all these things started happening. So the beginning of this was really trial by fire. Everything was happening so quickly. And there was rumors that like you said, Columbus and San Jose was going to go empty arenas. And then it sounded like the other teams were going to go empty arenas. So, it was so quick. And that, this time has just been good because it seemed like a lot of us, and like you said, a lot of us got moved to work at home, which meant scrambling to get all your stuff and get it set up and then kind of get adjusted to that. So, just, tell us what that's like from a play, from what you saw the players dealing with, what you saw from them just having to make that transition while the rest of the world was making a similar transition on a different scale.
I think, players almost have it harder in my mind, right? This isn't, their full-time, they don't live here. They're just here during the season. So, they're almost, I think, and I don't know for sure, but they had to get out of here, pretty quick. So I think a lot of them actually left for that 3-week span, and they had to kind of leave everything here, then come back and, get everything and make their way back to wherever they were going. I know, I don't know what the travel restrictions were, if you could only drive. I'm not sure that, but it was, because I know I saw, there was, I ran into Josh Jacobs. I was getting my tires changed, and there he was. So that was about 3 weeks after. So I know a lot of guys went home, came back, and it was pretty much, hey, we should get this announcement. And the longer, like I said, the longer it dragged on, but it's the right call. And as tough as that is for, me to say with the run that the team was on, it's the right call. And, when you said, you were on your podcast, did you extend that podcast by 3 hours that night? You should have, because they were just happening at the same time. And it was almost like if you're not the league to do this, then, you're going to be frowned upon. So I just feel like it was just that, wow, everyone's doing it. We got to do it. And then let's kind of settle down and see what's happening here. But I obviously it's the right call. Safety of fans, staff, players. There's so many people that make a home game run that you don't want to put anyone at risk.
So you mentioned the run that the Binghamton Devils were on, and I kind of want to pivot, from, coronavirus to kind of their on-ice play. But I do want to know, what did you think the playoffs would have meant to a team like this? So many young players, so many prospects, players that you would assume would eventually fight for NHL spots in the future. What do you think a playoff run would have meant to them?
Well, you see, in the AHL, it is so hard to repeat, right? And that's because when you go on a big run like that in the playoffs, a lot of your guys are signing, bigger deals elsewhere. And a lot of the teams that go far, their guys get picked because people pay more attention. The scouts are going to those specific games where, there's not as many games to pick from the deeper you get into the playoffs. So, the one thing that, we've done some video, we call it the quarantine talk. A lot of the things that the one word is we were having so much fun, no matter where you were on the road, whether it was hanging out with, if the guys are hanging out, whether it's on the bus, whether it's in the locker room, the word they used, it was just so much fun and confidence just, it breeds success, and the more confident a team is, you go into at the first start of the first half of the season prior to December, 13, 14 there, mid-December, before the Christmas break, it was a struggle, we're just, on the ice. And once the win started coming, the attitude, everything, the interviews with everyone got a little longer, a little happier. And it was just the vibe around it and the fans, the crowds getting bigger. The excitement on Twitter was probably the biggest thing. The excitement on the social media from New Jersey fans. Everyone just kind of started paying attention to what was happening here, and it was a 8-game win streak right there. They were 13 or so points in. They were in dead last, 13 points behind the 7th place team. Top 4 in each division make the playoffs. Then you have division champs, and then you play for the conference championship. So everything's kind of they do that obviously for the distance and travel, but it was some fun hockey to watch. And for Devils fans, they got to be fired up because you look at how many players are on entry-level contracts and the two-way deals. It's a lot of young guys, and to be able to put a run like that together, it was obviously disappointing that it had to come to an end, but I think it's something that New Jersey fans can be very excited about, and I think the future is very bright.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that this future is very bright for this Binghamton team, and I think you're going to get a lot of the players back. Just looking at the roster the Devils have now, the amount of cap space they have, and kind of the place that these Binghamton players are, I do think that you're going to see a lot of those players returning. But I do want to ask you, what's one player that you don't think is returning? What's one player that you think is going to either make the next step, or what's a player you don't expect to see wearing the Binghamton Devils logo?
Well, I'll go. You obviously the one thing you want to look at is, hey, who's gonna make that jump up, right? I think that's where you were kind of getting at, and there are so many guys to look at. Yanni Kuokkanen, Bastion was red hot coming down. Once he was a big part of you look at his numbers throughout the season, and talking with him, we did a dual pause cast with New Jersey. It was Nate and Mike McLeod, and I know I asked Nate in that about his second kind of half of the season, and he said it's you want management and scout and everyone to see how you're playing, without the puck. But he goes, and I like this, I've never heard this. He said, your points is like a report card almost, it's a grade. But you look at the season he had, fantastic coming down to the wire. A guy like Merkley, you guys saw him in New Jersey for a little bit there. Got that gnarly eye injury and then scoring his first NHL goal. Brett Seney had a great season. He had 44 points. He was basically in the lead until the Devils brought in Janne Kuokkanen, but guy like Joey Anderson, and I know McLeod finished the season. So you have a lot of guys. Marian Studenic has a lot of speed. Maltsev, you've seen his hands on social media. I know that. So there's a lot of guys, and even take a look in net. A guy that fans should be extremely excited about is Gilles Sen. I mean, he went on a tear toward the second half of the season, won like 7 in a row, and he was fantastic. So there's a lot of names of guys who, didn't even maybe see time in the NHL. I know Kuokkanen was up, but, him, Cini, Bastian, Merkley, Anderson full-time. You got a lot of guys to be excited about. And even Fabian Zetterlund, if you look at it, you say, okay, he had 19 points in 46 games, but he's a big body. He's very effective on the ice, I thought, when he played, and that's great to see as well.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to kind of see a full aspect of Kuokkanen because I've heard a lot of good things, kind of looking back to see what he did with the Checkers, and he played really well. But, we saw so many new faces this year, and a lot of people take that next step. But I expect a lot more new faces just based on where a lot of these prospects are. A lot of where these prospects are in the, in their, where they are in their development. Sorry, words are hard sometimes. But where they are in their development, who's a player in the Devils prospect pool that you're like excited to see up close and kind of get to call his plays and call his cadences and his goals and assists?
Well, I mean, you got to look at, Kevin Ball. You got to look at, what's going to happen with Ty Smith. He's gone so far into training camp for the past couple of years, but you just never know what might happen at the start of a season, all depending on what happens in the off season, right? So, you see a lot of the Kevin Ball, and he's a guy that, you start looking at more than now that he's a part of the organization. So he's a guy that is, I'm excited to see one day. Nolan Foote too. Don't forget about him as well. So, if I could pick the three, I'd say, Foote, Smith, and Ball. I'm excited to see in person, whether it's at if they're doing the prospects week there. I forget. It's slipping my mind now that there this summer. Yeah. So, and then the prospects challenge, if they do have that, I always love going to that up in Buffalo, and keeping an eye and seeing how these guys play for, in game action. So, but those are three guys that I'm excited to see one day.
And last question, Robin. We really appreciate you having on, kind of telling us your story of what's going on and during the quarantine. But, I got to know, you watched them all play this year. You watched them up close. Who took the biggest step this year?
It's a good question. And, hey, I got all night. We can do this as long as you want. I booked my entire night for you guys. So
I appreciate that.
But, getting back to your question, trying to think of, from last year to this year, a Nate Bastian, I think he took and it's not just, the points is, this kid played he played in every situation. He was PK, he was blocking shots, diving in front of pucks. He's in front of the net on the power play. He goes into the corners, gets the puck. When Baddock and McLeod were on a line, I mean, they were fantastic. And then Baddock was putting points up, and that line was just clicking. So I think, going back, if you want me to ask, if you want me to say from last year, watching a full season last year to this year, you got to think Bastian, you got to think Joey Anderson as well. Colton White, I think, as well, took a big leap. He was playing big-time minutes on the blue line. And, of course, if I'm going to guess from the start of the season until now, the Gilles Sen. And Scott Clemenson is in Binghamton a lot, and he's always good for about an 8, 9, 10-minute interview for me. So it's great. We can split them up to 2 intermissions. So, but, it's so interesting to hear from the goaltending side. Everyone can look at, okay, scoring so-and-so, but, goaltending is an art, and not a lot of people can break it down. So, it's always good to talk to Scott and what he had said about Gilles Sen, the coming over from the bigger ice to the smaller ice. And Binghamton's ice is actually smaller than pretty much any other. It's the neutral zone is a little smaller. So to see him get started and to where he finished, that was probably the biggest in-season leap that we saw.
So I've been given the word to stretch, and as a play-by-play guy, I'm sure you know what stretch means. So,
we get the stretch or the stretch one. We had back in juniors, we had a fire alarm go off, and I had to stretch for 40 minutes and not take a commercial. So I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to go that. I don't think we're going to put you through that kind of a ringer, but there are a couple players that I'm going to be honest with, Rob. I'm a little worried about what I saw. I've asked you about Mikey McLeod before, so I'll leave him on the back burner. But I want you to tell me about Josh Jacobs. He finally got a shot in the NHL. He's a former second-round pick. He's a guy who had a lot of the skills coming out in the draft, but I don't know what. I don't even know what to even project him as at the next level. I see him in the AHL, and sometimes he's on the first line, sometimes he's on the third line. What am I looking at when I look at Josh Jacobs?
I remember, this is deja vu, because I know you brought up some players you were worried about, and by the end of it, I think I had you convinced that everything was great. So I'm going to do that again here. Josh Jacobs, he played 54 games. He got hit. It was a nasty injury. It was in Lehigh Valley, and he leaned forward to block the puck and stuck his stick out. It went up under his shield and got him above the eye, and it was bad. Pretty nasty looking injury. So, but other than that, I think he's great. You look at the points, you could say, okay, he's on the third line. I don't look into, okay, this guy's on the first line, this guy's on the fourth line. It's what's the most effective lineup that you can put together. Who can you pair this person with? A lot of that goes into it, whether, he's on, I know when Boquist was down, he was on the third, fourth line, and people were like, why is he on the third and fourth line? It's just, it's what lineup can you put together to make the best put the best game together as a team, right? So, but he was plus 16 on the year, did 20 PIMs. I think he was great. He's a physical guy. He's got a good shot. He joins the rush, and I know that's something that Coach Denny, he was talking a lot about. He's like, guys, if you see something, especially, on the opposite side of the ice, might be a little more open, take it. And we saw a lot of that, and I remember him specifically saying about Josh Jacobs, and he went out and he scored that night on a 2-on-1 rush. I think it was down the right wing side. He took a quick snapshot, went off the post and in. So it was, it's also about, coach wanted to see something and guys doing it, and I think Josh was great at that.
You mentioned Dennehy, and I got to admit, I was very excited about getting Dennehy this season. I thought he was the right guy at the right time. He had a lot of head coaching experience in college. But now he's done such a good job. Is this something that we should worry about, where you think he might be a guy that makes the jump quickly if an NHL team comes calling? I mean, obviously you don't have a crystal ball. I'm sure he's not, opening up that information just freely. But I'm just curious, from what you've seen, do you think this might be a coach that is already getting offers with so many head coaching opportunities in the NHL right now?
I don't know if I get paid enough to answer that, but the thing that he had said, and I'll try to answer it with this, but the one thing that he had talked about was, okay, first year, it's so different. And when you're a college coach, your summers are recruiting, your summers are looking 4 years ahead, your summers are, going to these, they have a lot of these junior camps, right? You go to those in these little tournaments that you can try and get guys committed from. And now he's like, my summer is it's not that. So he said there's a huge difference too. You have 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old guys in college. You got to say, hey, are you getting your homework done? How are your grades? And now that was probably his biggest difference, he had said. So from the first year to this year, he comes into this year and off to a bit of a slow start, and then things changed, and the talking in interviews with him pregame, defensive zone changed, getting rid of the pucks quicker, out of the D zone, straight lines through the neutral zone, getting after the pucks, and he was able to motivate the team and get them to buy into all of that, and from one year to the next, that was a huge leap in my mind. And he said he learned a lot, in the first year. And how can you not? It's almost like your first year pro and you're coming out of juniors as a player. You go from college right to pro as a coach. Same thing. There's that learning curve, and he was quick to admit there was that learning process, and you saw a lot of the success down the stretch, and I believe it was a lot of the work ethic and hockey knowledge.
Last time I had you on, it was a couple months ago. I mean, time is just a different constraint right now with quarantine. But last time we had you on, I believe I asked about Mikhail Maltsev and how I was like, oh, we saw this guy in the preseason dominating NHL players. Then he struggled to start, and yada yada yada. Fast forward. Maltsev was one of the players that really turned it on down the stretch. Were you seeing a different guy than at the beginning when he was just struggling to get points, or is this somebody who's just maybe bad luck? Like, what did you see differently from the first half of the season to the second half of the season with Maltsev?
Well, I know, talking with him in interviews and reading things that he's done interviews with, one of the things that he had said, he's got the hands, right? You saw that in that preseason game. I believe it was at Madison's. I think it was in Madison Square Garden against the Rangers on his knees, and he did the Forsberg there from his knees. But so something like that, fires fans up. They're like, oh my God, we gotta, this is great. This is great, but there's a lot more, to it than that. And one of the things he's got the big body. He can defend a puck. I mean, it's almost, I want to compare it, when you see, watching Jaromir Jagr when he would go into a corner and just kind of use his back and keep the puck away from everyone. He's done, I can see that on the ice, and he's able to do that with the big body. But one of the things he says, I got to get faster. I got to, see the plays before they happen. He comes from, overseas, and he said it's so fast over here. It's a little bit different, and you got to make plays faster, and you can just see the curve. You look at everything, and when the team got, he got better, everyone got better, the team got better, and his points started to go up. I think he had, a 4-game point streak right towards the end. He was on a 4-game point streak. He had 5 points in that stretch, and then he prior to that, he had another 4-game point streak. So he had 2 4-game point streaks in the final, I think 11 games before the season was suspended. So, but he was fun to watch, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen with him too.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about pure on skill, it's hard to say anything except good things about Maltsev. But another guy who has all the makings, Matt Junio on the Facebook group, he wants to know about Fabian Zetterlund. I know I've asked you about him before. Have you seen a little bit more from Zetterlund since the last time we talked to you down the stretch? Has he shown you more of that, NHL prospect that we saw coming into the season?
Yeah, he's got that edge. And he's got some great goal celebrations. I can say that too. I know the Binghamton Devils Twitter posted that. He's got some great cellies there, but he was in and out of the lineup. to start. And if you're just going on and saying, oh boy, he played 4 times in the last 10 games. At the beginning of the season, he was coming off that injury, up the knee injury, and they didn't want to bring him back. A lot of times it's back-to-back games. A lot of times you're playing 3-3, which isn't, I don't think the NHL plays a 3-3. And I know back-to-backs maybe aren't, I don't think they're as common. But in AHL, you're playing, some weeks you're playing Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday, and so on. So I think it was a good plan. Let's get him back going. And once he started to get back in the lineup and get that feel, I liked how he played. He's a big guy. He plays fast, plays heavy, and I know that he was a fan favorite down here.
So, Rob, I really appreciate you coming on and spending more time than I asked. So I definitely really appreciate that. And you've been on multiple times now, so you're what we call a friend of the podcast. But as a friend of the podcast, we want you to be able to tell the Devils fans directly what you got going on. What you got any cool podcasts? Or talking to any cool players in the near future that we should look forward to?
Hey, I'm all ears. You could, if you want to tweet me some ideas, I'm all open to ideas here. So we do the quarantine talk. We've had some guys on. We had Nate Bastian surprise a fan, Megan. She's a huge Devils fan here in Binghamton. We had Nate pop on and surprise her when we were talking to her. So we have things planned, and it's. We're excited, about next season. How can you not be? You finish like this. I was joking we should do like a couple T-shirts, haven't lost a game since February 28th or something like that. So, but the game, it was a 7-game win streak to finish the season. So the last loss was February 28th. But, want everyone to stay safe, and you can tweet at me. It's at Rob Lippolis on Twitter. I post a lot of fishing things as well during the summer. So if you want to unfollow me for the summer, I get it. But it's I'm pumped. I like watching. Towards the end, it was great. And I'll tell you what, the New Jersey fans were paying a lot of attention, and it picked up right around Christmas. And the future, I think, is bright. And you look at some of the names that we had talked about earlier of guys who are coming in to this system, the Smiths, the Ball, and I'm really looking forward to next season. And if I'm a friend of the podcast, you guys got to send me a T-shirt or a hat or something.
Absolutely, Rob. I'll email you, and just email me your address, and we'll ship that out Monday morning. Okay.
I'm in for that.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much for coming on, Rob.
Hey, guys, anytime. Thanks.
That is Rob Lippolis from the AHL Binghamton Devils, giving us the stretch, the insight, as Steve Cangialosi has made his way to the back room. We actually have a virtual studio back room, a green room is what they say in the business. He's waiting there patiently, listening to Rob. He says he likes Rob. He loves Rob. It's great. So we're going to do something as we talk to Steve behind the scenes. And I want everybody on Facebook Live, Twitter Periscope, YouTube Live, Twitch, all to think about what kind of question are you going to ask Steve? I mean, that's a big deal. And we're going to read it off as they go. And we're going to be screening them. So comment below. We're going to get Steve Cangialosi shortly as we take a break. welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. And guess who's back? The one and only Steve Cangialosi of MSG Networks, Devils play-by-play guy, good friend of the podcast. Thank you, Steve, for coming into our virtual studio. We apologize. We didn't have any interns or anybody to greet you. You just came in through the door, through the magic of technology and your computer. How are you tonight?
You guys are much more high-tech than the last time I appeared on this show, maybe 9-10 months ago. So this is quite impressive. I'm doing fine here. My wife and I are doing fine here in North Jersey. We're riding out the COVID pandemic like everybody else. I did have the pleasure of listening to maybe the last 5-7 minutes of your chat with Rob Lippolis, whose work I have so much respect for, and I feel so bad for Rob because I know that one of the great pleasures that a play-by-play man has is when the team is hot and there's great success, and nobody saw that success coming. So to see the Binghamton Devils schedule and season halted in the manner in which it does, I feel for the guy. I can only imagine the exciting things he was looking forward to for the balance of this season that's not going to materialize. And I'll add this. He said, hey, no losses since February 28th. Well, the New Jersey Devils have not lost a game since March 10th, so nobody has much to complain about, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's no doubt that both the Devils teams were just on fire, playing their best hockey right before this pause. So that's kind of obviously there's bigger things, and I always say that, but, when you think of just hockey, it's kind of the sad part is we were seeing the best hockey of the season, whether it's AHL, NHL, and all parties. Even when you look at prospects, the Ottawa 67s who have 4 Devils prospects on it, they were playing really – it's just everywhere you were looking, Devils players and prospects were playing well. So it is a little bittersweet to see the situation unfold as it did.
And the team went 6-2-2 in the final 10 games that it wound up playing before the National Hockey League hit pause. And not only that, we were all waiting really since the first week of October for that stretch of a schedule where the Devils had 2 goaltenders playing well, and they had 2 goaltenders playing well towards the end. Mackenzie Blackwood, who might be a top 5 candidate for the Calder Trophy. Maybe he's even in the final 3 in consideration for the award. I don't think he'll win it, but 22 wins for him when the season was put on pause. And let's not forget, Corey Schneider found it again. Yes, he found it late, as he did last season, but he won 3 of his last 4 decisions. His goals against average, I remember, in those last 4 games was 1.5, and it seemed as if there was belief again that, hey, maybe it's not over for Corey in a Devils uniform. And tonight I'm sitting here just hoping the Devils haven't played their last game of the season. I know it's been reported really even in the last 90 minutes or so that all the signs are pointing towards a 24-team playoff format when the NHL does get back going. I'm still holding out hope. It might be a long shot for the regular season to continue, but I'm not putting anything to bed yet because the one thing I've learned over the course of the last 70 days is that the situation sure does change rapidly, and maybe the trend is going to be a lot better here in the next few weeks.
And to give you a little bit of hope, I've seen a couple people, but Sportsnet's been on top of that report that I think you're quoting, the one in the last 90 minutes about the 2014 playoff. Chris Johnston with Sportsnet says that the only thing that they've even have semblance of an agreement on is that playoff format. They still got to get on testing, hub cities, visas, and if certain things turn during those negotiations, I full disclosure, I live in Tampa, Florida. In Tampa, Florida, we're already in full phase 1 of reopening. So I think the Tampa Bay Rays start practicing tomorrow. We saw Tom Brady don a Tampa Bay Bucks jersey, which is bizarre, for the first time this week. So, if certain teams in certain places, and it's enough places, maybe they can fit those extra regular season games in. Like you are, I'm not completely confident that it's going to happen, but there is a ray of hope that we can kind of see a baby Devils team, which I would think would have an extended roster. We could kind of see some of those young players play well and kind of see Corey Schneider write it out. I think it would be a lot of fun to see a couple more games.
It would be a tremendous amount of fun. Now, granted, the atmosphere is going to be unlike anything we've seen because there would be no fans in the arena. The NHL at last check was considering 8 or 9 neutral sites. Personally, I think they've narrowed it down even further to this point. They're just trying to keep an open mind because, again, there's an unpredictable element to any individual market. But here, obviously, in the Northeast, again, I'm tempering enthusiasm, and the only enthusiasm that I'm bringing here is that some metrics here in the last few days have been very improved, where even the beaches in New Jersey are going to be open on Memorial Day weekend. Governor Cuomo, Mayor de Blasio have indicated in New York City that, hey, there's a chance we can go for a partial reopening in June. And if things continue to trend in that direction, could the NHL say, hey, let's bring it to the home markets, no fans? Wonder if there's still a little bit of hope there, but obviously now time is a factor. We're only 10 days away from the start of June. We'll see. But yes, a lot of young faces on the New Jersey Devils that we probably wouldn't have anticipated seeing until September in a camp or maybe midsummer in a developmental camp. We don't know what the plan for that will be right now. It would be nice, even if it's just a situation where they're playing 13 games, just to see players improve their numbers. A guy like Palmieri can get a chance at 30 goals and maybe even play spoiler in a playoff race as well. That was a lot of the drama in the last few weeks before the shutdown for the Devils, too.
Now, we talk about timetables and things like that. I'm very curious. We've seen, it seems like there's 2 plans for the draft, and they're very cut and dry. There's one where the NHL draft will happen before the restart, and one where it'll be traditional, where they'll do the playoffs and then do the draft. What one are you in favor of?
I'm in favor of the draft after the season is concluded. If you want to say I'm a traditionalist, and I understand the things that the National Hockey League have to balance here, and the need for content. We've been without real National Hockey League content for a very long time. The thing I wouldn't be jaded by is the success of something that I think operates in a completely different universe. A lot of people pointed to how the NFL draft was almost therapeutic for a lot of sports fans throughout the United States, and ESPN, of course, translated that into 3 nights of primetime television. I understand the need for the National Hockey League to start resonating with its fans across North America. I just think there are things we have to sacrifice in this new world, and maybe the NHL draft, in order to do it fairly, in order to do it right, should be at the conclusion of the season and not before. That's just me. I've heard the counter argument. I understand it. I think it's a good argument, but I would stay the course. And if that means you're drafting players in September, then so be it.
So you mentioned Corey Schneider before, and I feel like that's kind of the headline of the season. Is we came into the season thinking that it was a different Corey Schneider. He had one of the most insane stretches when you consider the end of last year, the World Championships, and the preseason. And then game 1, something happened. He tweaked something, and he just wasn't the same. What does he have to do at his age to avoid what's happened the past 2 or 3 seasons? When you talk about the beginning of the seasons, the past two seasons where he just couldn't get off to a hot start, and it really cost the Devils a lot of crucial points.
And it seemed to spiral out of control last season and this season. And if you know Corey Schneider, you can't help but feel so bad for him because he's an excellent teammate and he's a voice of reason in the locker room and one of the team leaders. And that's a hard thing to continue when you're struggling individually as a player to the point where you were waived and assigned to the Binghamton Devils. So there was a lot to unravel there. I actually think it's a double-edged sword. The longer we go here, obviously, Corey Schneider gets older. But the longer we go, Corey Schneider is more distant from the hip surgery that I feel has a lot to do with what has taken place here over the last 2 years. The thing I'll stress to you is this. He is 34 years old. There are number one goaltenders, or at least, let me couch it differently, goaltenders who play a lot in the NHL, guys who played a lot in this past season who are older than him. Pekka Rinne comes to mind. Marc-Andre Fleury. Henrik Lundqvist, probably in a reduced role, but he still played 30 games for the Rangers at the time of the pause. There are other guys. Corey Crawford, Craig Anderson. I'm not going to buy that Corey Schneider at the age of 34 cannot offer something good to the Devils or other NHL teams out there. I'll never criticize his work ethic. I'll never criticize his approach to the game. And I think if he stays with those things, there's still a usefulness for him, more than a usefulness, maybe an effectiveness for the balance of his career. It's very easy to say, let's discard. Let's buy the guy out. Enough is enough. And obviously, when it gets to the point where your struggles mean an assignment to Binghamton, that argument obviously should be heard. It's a fair argument. But the flip side of that is, what is your plan here to bring in another veteran goaltender to the organization? There might be one. Acquiring a quality goaltender via trade is a possibility. It's also a very difficult thing. You look at the unrestricted free agents that'll be out there this summer. Braden Holtby comes to mind. He'll have some phone calls, obviously. Robin Lehner is a guy who's available. Jacob Markstrom, but is that really an upgrade over a Corey Schneider if you anticipate Schneider bringing some of the good things that he brought just before the season was on pause? If you're asking me to guess here, and we might be a long way away from the Devils playing their next tangible competitive game, if you're asking me to guess, I still think there's a better than 50-50 chance that Corey Schneider is on the NHL roster next season.
Yeah, and honestly, it might have to do a lot with dollars and cents because Mackenzie Blackwood's deal is up this year, as you know. I'm saying you're lucky if you get him to sign for $3 million a year. I don't know what this pandemic is going to do to contracts, obviously, but I'd be thrilled if he signs on for $3 million a year. But then say you brought up the buyout. The buyout would cost the Devils $2 million over 4 years. So now you're paying $5 at the goaltender position and you don't have a backup. I don't think Gilson in Binghamton is close to being that backup yet. I think he still has 2 or 3 years in the AHL to kind of grit his teeth and get some experience. So say you bring in a Robin Lehner. To get Robin Lehner, that's probably going to cost you a minimum of $4 million. So now you're dedicating $9.5 million to the goaltender position, and that's what teams like Montreal is paying to Carey Price. So I think you're right in a way that the Devils are in a spot where there is a more than 50-50 chance of bringing back Corey Schneider, and he does bring a lot, like you were saying, what he does off the ice and the leadership in the locker room. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he's also the representative in the union too, correct?
One of two, along with Kyle Palmieri. The saving grace in the situation that you described is this, is that clearly now the Devils have identified a number one, and that number one has not even entered his mid-20s. So there are only a handful of NHL teams who can say that over the last few years. The fact that they have to negotiate something now with Mackenzie Blackwood that makes him happy, there's every confidence that whoever the general manager of this team is moving forward, that will get done. I think Mackenzie Blackwood's grown a lot, not only as a goaltender, but also there's a sense of maturity. And I can't speak directly to what Corey Schneider has had to do with that, but I can tell you there's a marked difference in the maturity of Mackenzie Blackwood from the first time that I met him a couple of training camps ago and from the guy I met on day one of training camp this year. I don't think the Devils are a team that'll be pushed against the cap totally as they enter a 2020-2021 season. There's a concern paying too much at that position, but I don't think it's anything along the lines of a grave hockey concern at this point. They've done this. They've identified their number one guy potentially for a long time to come. That is a big thing to have in their pocket moving forward.
Yeah, no,
Steve,
absolutely.
Sorry, Nick. Steve, we have a fan question from Matt Junio in the Facebook Live. He had first of many questions. He says, what do you think of Nico's year, and how do you think next year will go for him? Do you think his military training, elite athlete program will benefit the Devils?
Nico Hischier has it all in front of him. And sometimes I want to temper the talk about him developing into an elite defensive center in the National Hockey League. And hear me out. The trend of Nico Hischier here is very good. What he did as a rookie and the role he played in Taylor Hall's MVP season, you can't speak enough about. You can actually make the argument that Nico grew his game this year around much tougher circumstances than what he did in that last season with the New Jersey Devils. I think he's a future captain of the team. I don't know if he is the next captain of the team. I think there might be an intermediary stop with a Kyle Palmieri potentially, or perhaps one other candidate there. But I think that one of the things we have to do is put the brakes on what I think are unrealistic expectations for some of these guys, because John Hines did this himself when he was a head coach. He would refer to Nico Hischier as someone who during his career was going to win multiple Selke trophies as the league's best defensive forward, okay? That trophy, the fact of the matter is this: it's just as hard to win as a Vezina trophy or a Hart trophy, for the simple reason that it's only being awarded to one human being each and every year, okay? It only goes to the best. What Patrice Bergeron has done and what he's been able to do at this stage of his career is nothing short of remarkable. How many guys have been, if you think about a true defensive center, how many have been better than that respect over the last 12 years than Travis Zajac? Zajac has never won a Selke trophy, and as a matter of fact, he hasn't come close to this point in a very long, respectable career. So where do I think this goes with Nico? I think he continues to grow his defensive game. I think he's a center that you want on the ice when you're protecting a lead late. And as far as offensive capability, I think we're going to see a flip at some point where Jack Hughes, who probably has a little more in his offensive skill set, moves to a top line. Nico goes to a second line, still plays a very prominent role with the team, but I also think somebody who can still give you, very honestly, 65, 70, 75 points in a really well-played season. I'm glad they've locked him up for the 7 years that they have him beyond this.
I think great value.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the same thing. I think that I know a lot of people, non-Devils fans, people who didn't pay attention to the Devils much, didn't like the deal. They thought it was too much for a guy who hasn't hit, he's not a 70-point player yet and things like that. But I think it is that to lock him up for 7 years at a number that, I mean, I don't know what, like I said, I don't know what the coronavirus is going to do to contracts, but at that time when you signed that deal, it was something that looked like in 5-6 years, he could be a $9-10 million player. So you're getting him for 7 now. You're just paying him through that. So you're going to get value at some point. So, what were your first thoughts when you saw that deal?
Again, it's a deal you have to do, okay? You've clearly identified some people as the cornerstones of your franchise. And I think in the short time that Nico was with the team, Ray Shero identified him at the time, and it was Shero who obviously did the deal under his stewardship as general manager. I don't understand the counter-argument, quite frankly, that it was too much. I do think we're going to come out of this pandemic at some point, and a salary structure will be commensurate at some point, maybe 2 or 3 years from now, with what we thought the numbers would be in a 2023, 2024. I think the only hesitancy that anybody might have is that you don't see the offensive ceiling with Nico that you see with a lot of elite centers in the National Hockey League. Okay, I get that. But does a player like Patrice Bergeron put up his offensive numbers if he's not flanked with the likes of Brad Marchand and David Pastrnak? It works both ways. In high hopes someday during the course of these next 7 seasons, Nico Hischier is going to be playing with some elite wingers. And when he does, I think you'll see those numbers very honestly come up. I have no problem with the metrics of the deal and the amount of money that he signed for. He's a Devil long term. I'd be happy about that.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I couldn't be happier about that. Speaking of long term, what do you see the Devils doing with Kyle Palmieri? I know his name was mentioned a lot in trade rumors, but when it was all said and done and Tom Fitzgerald was asked about it, he said it would have cost more than anybody was willing to give to bring Kyle Palmieri here. So do you think that means the Devils are going to try to, give him a big deal to make him a Devil long term, or do you think that they revisit trade situations, or do you think they play out the year? What do you think is Kyle Palmieri's future with this team?
All right, so the basic answer to this, I believe, and you always start with this: does the team want the player, and does the player want the team? And I think the answer to each one of those questions is yes. Does it have to be a 7 or 8 year deal? I think that's where you venture maybe into some questionable territory. But if Kyle Palmieri loves playing in his home state, Montvale native, so popular with the players, I think if you go for a generous 5-year deal, there's nothing wrong with that. Palmieri is an excellent two-way player, I think, and I think the nature of his game is such that he can still perform 5 years into a contract, which would probably take him to about the age of 33. I think this will work out. Now, under a regular calendar, the Devils could have entered into negotiations with him starting on July 1st on a long-term deal beyond the one that he has signed for in the coming season. I think it will work out. I think that the Devils had many offers for Kyle Palmieri. There were multiple teams. The Bruins were one of the teams admittedly in the mix. It went beyond Boston just in terms of some of the best teams in the NHL looking to add that final piece. I suspect this will work out. And what I said on the air as we approached the trade deadline, Kenny Danico and I talked about this more than one time. Mid-game, we would try to weave these things in while we were waiting for a puck drop, and often you have only 18 seconds to do that. If you really have committed yourself to Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier being the futures of this franchise, and I'm one of those people, they have to have somebody to play with here. You've identified a couple of things that work. Just before the season was put on pause, you might recall Elaine Nasruddin putting Gusev together with Pavel Zacha and Jesper Bratt, and there was a stretch where they were lights out. Jack Hughes needs somebody to finish his passes. Nico Hischier needs somebody to finish his passes. I think you have to find a way to get 4 quality wings. Whether or not Bratt is one of them remains to be seen. I'd like to see him stay with the 2 guys he was playing with just before the season paused. And you have one under contract. I think you do everything you can to make that work. I would love to see, if I'm a Devils fan, I would like to see good money, 5 years, Palmieri stays beyond next season.
Steve, a lot of people are now chiming in the Facebook Live group. Jerry writes, so great to hear your voice, Steve. Michael High says, true, in reference to Nico being captain. And nice, Kanji is on. Glad I tuned in, Michael Bradley writes. So, John Longley, I miss this voice. Thank you for coming on. I mean, this has been fun. We had Dano on recently, and it was really funny because he doesn't know much about technology and computers. So anytime I would move the graphics around or full screen and zoom in on him, he would think that his computer was something wrong with his computer, and he's like shaking his computer, like, what's wrong with this thing? It was really funny, but yeah.
Why do I suspect Mrs. Danico had a lot to solving whatever technical issue might have existed? But nevertheless, yes. No. But to the fans who are reaching out right now, no, trust me, this is therapeutic for us when we get phone calls like this, because it's been some 70 days since we've had a chance to talk about our team, and we miss doing that in a manner like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I definitely love. I mean, me and Sam have been doing our best to kind of just venture through and keep talking New Jersey Devils hockey. And I know the Devils have been doing a lot of stuff with the podcast and with the content. And we had Chris Westcott on a couple of weeks ago to talk about all the content. So, I know you've done a couple of things. I know Matt Laughlin has done a bunch of stuff for the season ticket holders. What is that like? Just give us I always try to jump into the behind the scenes stuff. What happens when everything just goes on pause, and what are those meetings like where you're trying to literally build content out of nothing, something you didn't expect? What are those meetings that you have with producers or with the people at MSG or the people with the Devils? What are those like?
Yeah, and to tell you the truth, on our end at MSG, it has been somewhat minimal. Now, you have to understand the nature of this pandemic and what it does to a regional sports network. Very few people have actually entered the MSG Network studios since the city was basically put on pause for anything other than essential services. Few people have literally walked through the doors. So the content that you've seen on MSG have been classic games. I've enjoyed seeing those. You have to get a little bit resourceful. It was actually my father who called me a couple of days ago, and he said, "You're on TV from 10 years ago. You look a lot younger then." I go, "Really, Dad?" And it was the Marty Brodeur 551, his 551st victory in Montreal, the night he tied Patrick Roy's all-time wins record. I actually got to call that game with Chico Resch. Doc Emmerich was still on the crew back then, but he was preparing for a national broadcast the next day. So I got to do the record tire, and Doc got to call the record breaker against Chicago just a couple of days later. You're staying in touch with the fans. I think I've accepted every podcast or radio interview request that I've had here over the last 7 weeks. And eventually you're just going back to the same conversation of when do we expect to see our heroes on the ice again? And that can give you pause to think about a lot of things. I talked about that date when everything shut down, which was March 12th. I was literally coming out of the shower at home, getting ready to go to the rink for the morning skate that day. The Devils were supposed to play the Carolina Hurricanes, and I spoke to the longtime producer of Devils hockey, Roland Dratch. He said, "Stay home. The players aren't coming, and as a matter of fact, just stay in touch, but I don't think you're coming today, and you might not come for a long time." Here's the daunting thought that myself and I think a lot of the fans I've spoken to in the last couple of weeks always have. What if this is an 8.5-month gap between real Devils hockey? I mean, tangible competitive games. Because the notion has been floated by Gary Bettman that the season potentially could take us all the way until early September or late September or maybe even October 1st. And if that's the case, then the 2020-2021 season potentially would not begin until December 1st. So do the math there. You're talking about the last game the Devils played, that loss to the Penguins that we witnessed on March 10th, and maybe the next game that counts in the standings for them doesn't take place until December 1st. That's a daunting thing, something I don't want to wrap my head around just yet. I hope that's not the case. I hope they get to finish this season. But I know that possibility is there because we're kind of entering into uncharted territory. We've been there already for 70 days. I think we all just want to get the games back.
Yeah, Steve, if that's the case, then you're going to have to start teaching me soccer because that's a long time to go without hockey. Are the Red Bulls good? I don't know. You gotta teach me MLS if that's the case.
Yeah, Major League Soccer might be coming up with a unique idea as well, a tournament to be played strictly in Orlando, Florida. I know it's been widely reported today that the NBA might resume action with all the teams at Disney's Wide World of Sports complex down there in Orlando. MLS is thinking about doing the same thing before the teams can safely get back into the stadium. But hey, there was live German League soccer on the other day, and the ratings were as high as they've ever been, even here in the United States. So it's all about getting yourself in front of the television because that's the only way you learn, by watching the game. But I won't bring that here unless you want to talk about it privately.
It's funny, Steve, as you're going telling that story, the Carolina game that Thursday, we were actually, the podcast, it was our first road trip. We were actually supposed to do a live podcast of the Bahama Breeze outside the BB&T Center that Saturday against the Florida Panthers, if you remember your travel schedule. And then Sunday outside of Amalie Arena. We actually got permission by the team to do a Devils podcast outside of Amalie Arena. And that Thursday, along the way, I actually pulled over the side of the road. Jonathan, our other co-host on this podcast, he's a teacher, and we immediately did breaking news. And I was in the middle of South Carolina that the NHL paused. And then that Saturday, I went ahead. I was like, well, I'm here anyway. So I did it with Chico Resch phoned in. He was supposed to meet us, Nick and I, down in Sunrise to do a live podcast. And that Sunday, and I had worked pretty hard at it for about 4 or 5 months. We had Doc Emmerich on that Sunday night. That was after the pause. And that was so therapeutic because at that moment, it was just the unknowns, what's going on, and just hearing that familiar voice. I will never forget that. I will never forget that because I could have just bagged it and went back home, but I just went ahead anyway. Of course, you're kind of a little afraid and scared or whatnot, but we did it. And just hearing Doc Emmerich that Sunday night, just talk, and just, you know, you kind of felt like, you know, things are going to be okay, but we got to be really careful, even though we don't know what's going on. So I'll never forget that moment.
That's admirable. That's pretty admirable. And I'll give you a little behind the scenes here about all of the mystery of that time when the league was put on pause. We were getting prepared for every scenario. I know our crew at MSG Network, because at the time the season was paused, the Devils had that game on a Thursday night against Carolina, and then they were supposed to play the next 3 on the road, the trip that you're referencing, the 2 games in Florida and 1 more. We were preparing for multiple scenarios, our crew. We weren't sure that we were going to be allowed to get on the plane with the New Jersey Devils, travel with them, and do the games from site. We had begun to make arrangements, if necessary, even to do the games from our Madison Square Garden studios, with Kenny and I literally calling them off a giant monitor. You'll lose a lot in the call of the game that way, but again, this is all about what you're going to be able to do. And this kind of leads us into what the job will be like once this pandemic subsides, and whether or not we will be inside the arena. You know, there are powers that be and people above my pay scale who make those decisions, but there are many, many decisions here. I'm fairly confident of this. The manner in which we do games moving forward will change markedly from what we knew just a couple of months ago, at least for the short term and maybe for a long time. And you just reminded me, Sam, I've got to give Doc a call to see how he's doing. It's been too long since I've chatted with him. We usually chat a couple of times every season, so I think we're overdue, because if the league does come back, he's going to get very busy real fast, and I know I will as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, and I also, you know, I follow Erica Wachter on Twitter, and you know, she's about to get married, and I just can't imagine now thinking her. I sent her a quick message because my cousin is getting married in October, so that's surreal. It's you can't imagine, you know, having all these plans and then suddenly just the unknown. But she seems to be keeping a very positive attitude, you know, throughout all of this. But yeah, and you know what we decided as a group, because there's a Sunday podcast as well, John, Scott, and Scotty, that we decided, you know what, I think at this point, I think the fans need us at this point, because, you know, we do this for fun. We love our Devils. We love the community. And the last 2 or 3 years doing this podcast, you know, we've been always trying to promote what's right about being a Devils fan. And then suddenly this happened, and it's like, wait a second. We're doing everything remotely anyway, so
we've got a pretty tight-knit crew, Sam, and that is one of the things about this pandemic. There have probably been about 50 or 60 times that you just had this urge to call up the guys on our crew and say, "Hey, do you want to meet for a beer and chat? We can, you know, kind of commiserate together." And that's been taken away from us as well. It's so funny. You talked about Erica. Yeah, she's supposed to get married. And the last time I spoke with her, it's on for late June. I hope those plans all stay the same. That'll be a great chance to see everybody. I hope to be there, but, you know, again, we're just worried about tomorrow and not necessarily, you know, a month from tomorrow these days. But you're touching on something that's important, and you should be on as often as you possibly can, because I think the fans really do appreciate that. And this franchise has done a remarkable job in connecting with its fan base. Let's face it, over the last few years in particular, everything it has done on the digital side, our relationship with the Devils, it's been tremendous. The team provides a lot of terrific content, whether that's with Amanda Stein or Chris Westcott or NJ.TV. There's a whole new world that's developed there, and I think the fans, by and large, very much appreciate all of that.
Oh, yeah, and also, just remember, sorry, Nick.
No, you're fine. No,
sorry, that's the problem. As you know, Steve, that's the problem with remote sometimes. But one thing I did notice as well, and as a season ticket holder, the Devils, the ownership group, management group, stepped up big time, especially when they reversed that decision about furloughs and they just got it right. I don't care about if there was a mistake made. The fact of the matter is they got it right immediately and addressed it. And I think it was Joshua Harris that admitted, hey, we were wrong. Sorry. We changed our minds. Because those employees, to Devils fans, our season ticket holder reps, all the staff, they're important to us. And I actually got a friendly call from my season ticket holder rep a couple days ago, Andy. And I told her, I said, you know what? Because of that, I don't care if we have to eat the season or whatever, because we were talking about refunds and all that kind of stuff. My money's with the Devils right now. Because just the way the management treated their employees, and then, that one little mishap, boom, done. And then you read the stories of the minority owner that owns Fanatics, Michael Rubin, and taking these baseball jerseys, getting permission from Major League Baseball, and then turning them into masks and gowns and, protective gear. To me, that means a lot because, the season was bad. Everything's bad. You get all, and then when something like this happens, then you see the true character behind the scenes. It's like, you know what? We had a bad season. You get a pass.
Full disclosure, Sam. Full disclosure, Sam, I don't work for the New Jersey Devils, so I work for the MSG Network. So I'm apart from the situation that you're talking about right now. But yes, it was so well received, I think, by everyone. And for people on the Devils staff, obviously, it makes potentially a world of difference in their lives. It was admirable. It was great to see. Beyond that, just their connection to the community, what they've done with places like RWJ Barnabas Health. It's a remarkable relationship that I have. I know my wife and we live a little bit closer to Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, which was probably the single hardest hit hospital in New Jersey. And a friend of mine owns an Italian restaurant in the city. We went and we picked up about 70 hot meals for the staff on the COVID floors there to deliver. And you saw it in their faces when we were able just to drop it off at the entrance of the hospital, what that means. Everybody, whether you're a Devils employee or not, is looking for support, is looking for a helping hand in all this. And good people are going to lead us through this. But yeah, that was so heartwarming to see, obviously. And don't worry about stepping on each other with the delay. This happens to Lester Holt on the NBC Nightly News. It's going to happen to you guys too.
No, honest to goodness, I deal with this all day and all night. My day job, my night job. So it's where you do what you can with what you're given, and we were given an interesting situation. But you know what? You've seen it. We've seen it. It is what it is. If you're providing good content, which this is absolutely what this is, everybody will be a little bit more forgiving during these times. I do want to turn back to hockey just real quick, just because you're the one who saw it up close, and you've seen more hours of Devils hockey than all of us put together, probably. I want to know, and I think the fans want to know what doesn't make sense to me is that you trade Taylor Hall, you trade Blake Coleman, you trade Andy Green, you trade Wade Simmons, you trade Louis Domingue, you trade Sami Vatanen, and then they play better. Did you see why that happened? What happened there? And maybe it's as simple as saying Mackenzie Blackwood became an elite goalie for that stretch. But is there anything else you saw from this team that made it a winning team with a lot less talent?
Well, that's pretty loaded. And I think, in all fairness, you hit the biggest bullet point there. They were stopping pucks. Their save percentage improved drastically from February 1st until the pause of the season. The team in the NHL with the best goals against average was the Colorado Avalanche. Number 2 in the league in that time, the New Jersey Devils. So that is where you cut to the chase. What changed? Each one of those situations, or at least the Hall situation, is probably different from the others, okay? Obviously, the trade was a lot earlier in the season, and I kind of predicted the timeline. I'm not going to pat myself on the back because I always wanted to see Taylor Hall stay with the team, but I did say that if it wasn't done, a long-term contract extension by U.S. Thanksgiving, then I thought that's when my radar would be really up, and you had to accept the fact that Hall would be gone from the organization. It did happen right around that time, and the Devils moved on. A couple of things here that come to mind. Number one, let's not equate the pressure of a team trying to find its way out of a losing streak in December with a team that was realistically out of the race in February and March. The pressure is different. There's a lot off your shoulders at that point, and I think you play a little bit looser. I think that really manifested their game. The one thing that I think Elaine Nasruddin brought to this team that I just saw tangibly is, and Elaine is another story entirely. I think he's done a tremendous job here, and I was very surprised as we went from city to city how much respect he was garnering throughout the league. But the one thing that did stop, it seemed as if early in the season, when the Devils made a mistake at a key moment in the game, it blew up into 2 or 3 more mistakes that ultimately meant they had no chance to win the game. Along the line, during this process, it seemed to me there came a point where they were able to take a punch. You give up a goal, it's over. The next shift, you forget about it. You gave up another one, it's okay. Outplay the opposition on the next 3 or 4 shifts, and you're going to find your way out of this. They were less susceptible to having the entire game blow up. And if you want to say that has a lot to do with a bit more mental toughness or again, the goalie stopping the puck, that kind of solved itself as the season went on. And there did come a point where the trades that they made towards the deadline, I think we all knew the direction that they were going in. Blake Coleman, to me, kind of hit home because I had a wonderful relationship with him, number one. He was one of the guys who was the pulse of the locker room. And I thought that if they were going to move a guy like Blake Coleman, it would have to be for something special. We're going to see whether the haul for Blake Coleman, and specifically Nolan Foote, is something special. But you can't really grade those things for the next 3 years. The fact of the matter is, at the time with the pause, the Devils had the 7th lowest point total in the NHL. It was going to take a monumental, historic comeback over the last 13 games to get back into the conversation. That likely was not going to happen. Blackwood probably is at the forefront of what you're talking about in terms of improvement and the record being better in the second half of their year.
Real quick, you just because we mentioned the Hall situation, looking at just the numbers, I don't think Arizona can re-sign him, even though Rick Tocchet said he wants to. I just don't think that the salaries match up with what they have on the roster, and they it looks like they might have like $1 million in cap space before chicanery. Do you see the Devils maybe going back to a Taylor Hall whose demands I'm imagining have to be less now, just because of A, the pandemic, and B, because he didn't have a Hart Trophy year? Do you see a possible reunion in this offseason?
I don't. That's not to say I wouldn't embrace it wholeheartedly, because I think Taylor is still a heck of a player. But I think you have to ask yourself, if it wasn't good enough for Taylor Hall during an exclusive negotiating period, what exactly is going to change now? Potentially, I understand the argument that maybe he's left a lot of money on the table here by rejecting whatever the Devils might have had numerically on the table with him 1 year ago. That's something that he might have to live with. But let's not even go there with any definitive no tone yet, because all it takes is one general manager to recognize his value, his skating ability, and his ability to put fans in seats. I think there will be suitors for Taylor Hall. I think maybe the notion of 7 years, $10 million a year is kind of a conversation that's gone by the wayside. But Hall was always very honest about this himself, and I'll never forget, in the waning stages of his days with the Devils, he said something to me that was very interesting. He goes, "I don't know my value as a player. Normally that's not something an agent wants to hear his client convey to the media, but Hall actually said the words, "I don't know my value as a player." And I think he actually tried to have a level of humility about it when he was speaking those words, but I also think there was some honesty there because so much of his game is predicated on speed, and that is something you will naturally lose as you cross over onto the other side of 30. I think Zach Parise is a good case study about where he stands to this day with the Minnesota Wild. I still think he's a heck of a player. I still think he's a wonderful guy in the locker room. He has wonderful effect on anybody and clearly a role model for anybody on the club. But let's face it, you're not going to skate the same way at 34 that you did when you had fans jumping out of the seats at age 25. There comes a point where your greatest asset, speed, and your ability to run through a wall becomes a liability at some point in your career. And I think general managers know that about Taylor Hall. But again, Nick, all it takes is one suitor with the right cap space to say, hey, we want you. Here's how much we want you. Come aboard, sign here, 8 figures before the decimal point,
Steve, Facebook Live has Craig Best and Lisa Biscar. Nasruddin for coach. Nasruddin to stay with the team. They're both asking you, what do you think, Steve, about Alain Nasruddin?
I think he scored points here. What that's going to translate into, I do not know. Let's not forget, this is somebody who had not held a head coaching position by the time before he was appointed by this team to succeed John Hines early in the season on December 3rd. And then there was the rocky 7-game winless streak when he took over. Those were things that could have been very deflating. I said earlier to you guys, one of the things that was eye-opening for me as we went from city to city, and I asked other people about Alain Nasruddin, people who've crossed paths and might have worked with him at other stops, what you think of him. And the respect that he garnered was eye-opening for me. Now, what do the Devils do here? It's a great question. One, unfortunately, that I don't have an answer for your listeners on Facebook. I will say this. I do think we see the makings of someone who will be a head coach in the National Hockey League on a full-time basis at some point within the next 2 seasons. Whether that's with the New Jersey Devils or not, I cannot tell you at this time. But whatever his stock was in the coaching community 4 months ago, it has risen markedly from where it was to what it is now. He's done a heck of a job under some pretty difficult circumstances, too.
Absolutely. I mean, the improvement, especially in Mackenzie Blackwood in February, and that February 29th, that one loss that could have been undefeated, but not going to hold it against anybody. The improvement, it's just night and day from October to February and March that the Devils improved under him. And it should be I think he's going to stay, and I think Fitzgerald's going to stay. Because right now,
I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of that, certainly. As far as Blackwood goes specifically, give some credit to Roland Melanson there, too. And I hope he's back with the organization. That's another thing that remains to be seen. We don't know that he will be back. There's a little bit of an air of mystery there. Remember something else about Blackwood, Sam? This wasn't supposed to be the plan for him this season. The plan was for him to maybe start 30 games tops, have Corey Schneider take the number 1 role. And one of the coaches actually shared with me, they wanted to have nights where a third goaltender was brought up for the minors to be a backup for Corey Schneider so that it could make Mackenzie Blackwood a healthy scratch and have him watch games from the press box with Roland Melanson. Make that part of the educational process of a young goaltender. But what happens early in the year? There are struggles from Schneider. That plan blows up, and suddenly it's baptism by fire where he's playing more than any of us might have anticipated. But again, there took a maturation on the part of Blackwood to take the bull by the horns and play as well as he did. And his answers and his approach during that time, he quite often sounded like a seasoned veteran before and after those games. That was one of the eye-opening moments for me. Again, much more mature than when I first met him a couple of years ago.
Well, just remember one thing, and I think we all forgot. He had his teeth knocked out in that one game, and he was out for a while, and then he was able to come back from that horrific shot that he took to the head, and then went on a streak in that February, which I thought was remarkable. And to me, it was he's a hockey player. He got back right away, and they just kept putting him in games, and then finally he got on a roll. I mean, there was a horrific injury with all the teeth knocked out and whatnot, and that's what impressed me the most. Not just the winning, Steve. It was really just how he bounced back, mentally tough, big kid. Kind of reminds me of a young Sean Burke in a way. Just his build, big goaltender, and attitude, and I think he could be the number one for a while in New Jersey.
Well, he's a tremendous athletic specimen. I think all of us can agree on that. In the sequence that you're talking about, as far as the teeth go, that just makes you a loving member of the hockey community, probably. But I think the concern by the Devils was there something more than that. Was there a concussion? And to see him come back and play so well in the aftermath of what could have potentially been a serious injury was heartwarming. But we're going to see now how he handles a number one on a full-time basis. That's also another learning curve that I think we'll experience out of the gate for the first time with Mackenzie Blackwood, because whenever the next season begins, it's probably going to be the first time in the NHL that he goes into camp as the man. And there's a little bit of a different pressure, I think, on a guy's shoulder. Again, I think he's going to be equipped to handle it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, taking time out of your day. Really appreciate it, because the comments are just rolling in today, and everyone was all fired up when we put out that tweet that you were going to be on and Rob Lippolis was on, and just to have back-to-back play-by-play guys, it was just kind of a treat. Nick and I were talking off air. It's like, hey, we're double shifting today. This is great.
The pleasure was absolutely mine. I would say anytime, guys, and I hope the next time you have me on, it's to talk about real games that our favorite team is involved in, because I think there's a future here, and I think that future is going to be bright, and I can't wait until we're talking about hockey itself rather than just what we're all experiencing at this time. So to you guys and everybody who said such nice things as well on social media, thank you. The pleasure's been all mine.
Great. Well,
I really appreciate talking to you, Steve. Oh, we're both saying goodbye. So
take care, guys.
Thank you, Steve. All right. Well, we'll be back. Nick, I have to confirm it, but we'll be back for a Friday special. We've got somebody coming in from overseas, beaming him in on Friday, but we just don't know what time because there's a time zone difference. Steve, you're probably guessing in your head right now who it could be. We'll tell you off air in just a sec, but see you Friday. Let's go Devils.